Hello, everybody. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And today is Monday, the 7th of April of 2025. And it's a Monday morning here on a very, very rainy Mystery Island. And speaking of mysteries, my dad's life to me has been a mystery all of my life. And as his only and oldest child, I think I have carried this burden with me ever since his untimely death from metastasized cancer in June of 1971. We have studied his career with all of the publicly available material we have. I want to thank many people who've attended the McDuff charrettes and helped me to put together all of the details that I have so far. And I'm here today to just smile and say we've made some progress over the past week or so. It's tied to the work that we've done in McDuff's Mindfields number 272 about Eugenio Pacelli, the Pope during World War II, Pius XII, and then also about Cardinal Spellman of New York, who was Pacelli's man in the United States, really the American Pope, as one book titles him. And we read some from that in those earlier episodes. So we have a Catholic approach to trying to understand the world and try to understand what was going on in the Vietnam War, and of course the Laos War, which was a secret war going on even earlier, and at the same time with secret operatives of American force projected out by the CIA and not by the Pentagon. But this complicated situation is starting to become more and more clear to me as I've read more and more books. And so, along with the book I've shared portions of with you, by James Carroll, which is General Joseph F. Carroll's son. This book, The American Requiem, along with that, back to this very, very important book, TDY by Douglas Valentine. I've read TDY to you a few years ago. I don't even know if it's still available on my in my archives because of the YouTube strikes that have happened. But if you haven't read it, please get a copy of it. You can get it from Amazon, or you can go to Doug's website and get it from him. I'm very pleased to have Doug signed the copies that I have. I have a few of these left that he signed for me back in 2020, April 6th, 2020, to John O'Loughlin, son of Mr. Hammer. With all best wishes, Douglas Valentine. Mr. Hammer is the name of a character in the book TDY. It's an exciting book. It's an amazing story. In a raid by one part of our military into a hidden part of Laos to try to catch the CIA dealing with the drug dealers and buying opium and heroin for sale, of course, without the knowledge of the American public. And really, the CIA was, in this instance, extending itself so far that I think by putting together in hindsight what I have here, we finally got them busted. If you haven't seen it yet, that the CIA was running drugs out of the Golden Triangle, well, that's the theme here. So I want to start with Doug Valentine's book and just introduce you to Pete, who is the person telling the story. Of course, his name has been changed, as well as that of Mr. Hammer, who we now know from Doug Valentine himself was in fact my dad. Thomas F. O'Loughlin Jr., working at SACSA at the time. So Pete, a very low-level Air Force photographer, is given an opportunity to take a mysterious TDY mission, temporary duty mission. And long story short, he accepted it. He says he was going to get $2,500, and that was really on his mind. He was going to get a new stereo and maybe even make a down payment on a Ford Mustang. He felt like a kid dreaming up a Christmas list as he fell asleep. And then the next day he gets his orders. And I'll read from there. My final clearances and TDY orders came 2 days later on a Friday, not from the personnel director, but from the hard-charging security chief. I got a call at my office saying he wished to speak to me in his office ASAP. He says, "You've got the assignment if you want it." I told him I definitely wanted it. "Then here are your orders. Take a good look at them." On his desk was a standard TDY form, a single sheet of paper titled Temporary Duty Order Military. At a glance, it looked perfectly legitimate. The security chief had signed his name on the orders issuing official, and the personnel director had signed his as the orders authenticating official. The purpose of TDY was photo reconnaissance, just as I'd been told. The itinerary listed a APO zip code in California as my point of departure, and Clark Air Force Base, of course, in the Philippines, as my destination. I couldn't see anything wrong with it, not that I expected to. "Have you seen your orders?" the security chief asked. "Yes, sir." "Do I get a copy?" "No, you do not. You've seen your orders, and that's enough. You still want the job, don't you?" I said I did. Even if I had reservations, I wasn't about to back away from the $2,500 because of a single piece of paper. "Good. Now that we've gotten that taken care of, you'll return to Eglin Air Force Base for your preparation." Security said, "You know what to pack and how to conduct yourself?" I said, "Yes, I did." And he says, the next day I was on another hop to Eglin with only the foggiest notion of why, but that's the standard procedure in the military. People come and go, and no one asks questions, especially of superior officers. It's all part of the motivational indoctrination. When your job is done, you go back to doing whatever you did before. You might unwind with someone you were trained with and trust implicitly, but you never talk to strangers. It was the same unwritten rule that applied to smoking pot on base. You simply did not put your business on the street. As my sad little story will illustrate, this obsession with deniability was one of the nastier byproducts of the Vietnam Watergate area. Naturally, the CIA started the practice and perfected it in the name of national security. One of their people would hook up with a line outfit, and he would not be wearing a name tag, and his name was either Smith or Jones. But the innocuous Mr. Smith always had the authority to tell everyone else what to do. Everyone resented it, of course, because trouble invariably followed on Mr. Smith's heels, but everyone eventually got used to it. Eventually, the obsession with deniability spread throughout the military to the point where it became normal to assign ordinary people like myself to special operations. Our identities were meaningless. If a guy had a nose like a beak and bobbed his head, his name was Birdie. And so on. I'm going to go up to page 8. A hop is any plane, big or small, that travels nonstop from one airbase to another, moving personnel and materiel. Hops are the Air Force's version of public transportation, and there were frequent hops between all major air bases, especially those like ours that were in the strategic or tactical air commands. What was extraordinary about the C-123 hop I took to Eglin Air Force Base, however, was that I was the only passenger on it. Eglin Air Force Base occupies a wide stretch of territory in the Florida Panhandle near Fort Walton Beach. It was my first visit there, but by reputation, I knew it was the headquarters of the Special Air Warfare Center, through which all combat and forward air controllers passed on their way to Southeast Asia. As stated in the regulations, the mission of Special Air Warfare Center is to organize, equip, and train assigned or attached personnel to participate in special air warfare operations anywhere in the world. When translated into layman's terms, all of the above means that Eglin was and is a very special place. The instant I stepped off the C-123, I was stopped by a security policeman who checked my ID, put me in a Jeep, and drove me to the security police headquarters at Hurlburt Field. I was escorted to a numberless briefing room with nothing inside it except a table and 2 chairs. The guard stood at attention outside the door, and a few minutes later, a large man dressed in civilian clothes entered the room. He introduced himself as having field grade rank, but neglected to produce identification or mention his name. These were not oversights. The man in mufti was formidable, at least 6'2" tall and well over 200 pounds, with an ache of toughness that befit a big city chief of detectives. He settled his bulk into a chair, cast an intimidating stare in my direction, motioned for me to be seated, and then stated that he was there to screen and prepare me for the assignment. In his hands was my personnel file. For lack of imagination, I'll call him Mr. Hammer, after Mike Hammer, the famous fictional detective. Mr. Hammer began the interview with questions about my background, just to make sure I was the person I claimed to be. He asked for my father's name and my mother's name and their dates and places of birth. He asked if I had any brothers or sisters and asked for their dates of birth. And when he was finished with that, he noted that I had graduated top in my basic training class in hand-to-hand combat and armaments. That seemed to please him. When he had established to his satisfaction that I was who I claimed to be, he told me that I had been selected for 2 reasons. First, because I was judged to be an excellent photographer. And second, because I already had a security clearance, which conveniently absolved them from having to expend the time and energy of conducting an extensive background check. He then explained that my instructions would come piecemeal as the mission progressed, and that in the meantime he would tell me generally what it was all about, and specifically how I was to conduct myself at Eglin. To wit, upon receiving my final clearances, I was to return to Eglin wearing my 1505s, the standard Air Force summer weight uniform, and that apart from an overnight bag, I was not to bring along any personal effects. In addition, I was to remove my name tag and any other identifying insignia from my uniform. My military ID would be confiscated upon my return, at which point I would be introduced to the other members of the team with whom I would receive special training in the latest and most sophisticated camera equipment the U.S. military had to offer in preparation for a top-secret photo reconnaissance mission in the Philippines. There was to be no fraternization with the other technicians, nor was there to be any discussion about our personal or military backgrounds. To do so would be considered a serious breach of security and would result in my immediate dismissal from the mission. Then he paused and said very seriously, "The success of the mission depends upon your conducting yourself in accordance with these instructions. Do you think you can handle it?" The swiftness of my sincere "yes, sir" surprised even me. Hammer folded his beefy arms around his barrel chest, eyed me warily for a moment, and then nodded his head ever so slightly. I knew right then I'd gotten the job. In conclusion, Hammer said the team would remain in isolation once we were assembled, and that we would stay in isolation until the job was done. After our training, we would fly to another air base in the U.S. and then to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. We were to be thoroughly outfitted before our departure, and although he did not foresee any danger, I would receive hazardous duty pay and a sizable bonus upon completion of the assignment. He relaxed and asked if I had any questions. I did. How many people will be on the team? It'll be a small team, he replied ambiguously, 10, maybe 12. How many photographers? Tensing a bit at the directness of my question, he said, a few. What will we be photographing, sir? Quote, you'll be receiving that specific information later on at the proper time, he replied curtly, as I've already explained. A person doesn't become a journalist without a knack for pushing people to their limits, so very respectfully I asked, sir, can you tell me about the type of training we'll be receiving? From the way he bridled, I knew that Hammer did not like being pumped for information. He was accustomed to asking the questions, and his patience was wearing thin, but he gave in. You will be introduced to custom-designed camera equipment and trained in its use. Details of this aspect will be presented to you during your instruction. Leaning forward, he grumbled, now, if you have no more questions. No, sir, I said submissively, even though I had 20 questions I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Once again, I suppressed myself. Fine, he said, your escort will take you back to the airfield and you'll return to your base. A final decision regarding your qualifications will be processed as soon as possible. You know how to conduct yourself. You're dismissed. You know, it's interesting when Mr. Hammer introduced himself and saying that he has field grade rank. Well, my father didn't have a field grade rank officially at that time, but he did describe his level at the Pentagon as being that of a full colonel. So that, of course, is field grade rank. Uh-oh, my camera went away. So sorry, I lost my camera there. I don't know how long it's been gone because I wasn't looking at your comments. Let me see if I can fix this. There, now I'm back. Look at the comments for a second. Oh. All right, thanks for your comments. I think we are back now, and apologize for, don't know how it happened, but the video quit. Okay, we're back now reading some more. I was taken back to my plane, feeling confident that I would get the job, mostly because they seemed so pressed for time. My only disappointment was that the mission was in the Philippines and not Vietnam. But even if it wasn't going to be as exciting as I hoped, the money and travel were still there, and if I did the job well, who knows, it might lead to bigger and better things. I chose not to dwell on the uncertainties. Back at the base that night, I focused instead on what I could buy with $2,500. As I fell asleep, visions of sugar plums danced in my head, and of course, the bulk of the book is the mission itself. As I say, it's a nail biter of a tale. You know, his team, they end up getting shot up. Very few of them survive, but he does get the film. He does get the images. And so at the end of the book, there's another encounter with Mr. Hammer. And so he's been shot in the arm. He's just barely survived. And so now they are leaving Laos. They go back into South Vietnam in a helicopter ride. And All right, let's pick it up here on page 105. We were flying northeast, I believe. The setting sun was behind us, and it was dark when we arrived at the U.S. Air Force Base in Da Nang. Waiting for me there was an armed guard of Air Force security people under the command of a lieutenant colonel wearing the red and yellow MAC-V patch with the sword in the middle. I distinctly remember that. The lieutenant colonel thanked the escort officer and watched while he walked away. Then he asked me, "Have you got the film?" I said I did, and he said, "Good. Now let's get your arm taken care of." Well, by the way, in the book, you learn that he's ordered to give the film to Mr. Jason and nobody else. And you will know Mr. Jason when you see him because he's given the photographs and detailed description of how he will recognize this man named Mr. Jason. And that's the mission, is to get the film to Mr. Jason, get the message to Garcia, right? But that is the mission. At his direction, the security people took me over to a dispensary where my wound was cleaned and stitched and bandaged. I was not allowed to shower, but I was given clean fatigues and then led back to the lieutenant colonel's office. He posted 2 guards outside the room and told me to be seated. The lieutenant colonel was tall and thin, in his 30s, with clear blue eyes. He had the look of an educated, intelligent man, maybe Ivy League. He lit a cigarette and then asked, "What happened out there?" I was struggling to stay awake and was uncertain of my status, but I remembered what the major had said. "I'm sorry, sir." I replied, "I just don't know." He's not allowed to talk to anybody except for Mr. Jason. And of course, being a MAC-V guy, then MAC-V is run by the CIA. So he has to be very careful about what he says, or else he'll blow the mission. Quietly, the colonel asked, "What were you shooting?" My answer was direct and to the point. "With all due respect, sir, you must know that I'm under orders not to say anything to anyone except to a man whose face I'll recognize when I see him." Showing my resolve, I asked, "Do you know where he is?" The light colonel took a drag on his cigarette, exhaled a steam of smoke, and said, "He's on his way. He'll be here soon." I got the feeling his questions were a sort of test. He also seemed sympathetic to the degree that any officer can sympathize with an enlisted man. He said, "Don't worry, I'm here to help. Is there anything you need?" When I said I could use a little sleep, he stood up, snuffed out his cigarette, opened the door, and called in one of the security people. "Take this man to your billet and let him crash on one of your bunks so he can get a few hours' sleep." Then he turned to me and said, "You look like Christ off the cross." Addressing the security guard again, the droll lieutenant colonel said, "Keep this man under close watch. Don't let him out of your sight, and don't let anyone touch him. I'll let you know when I want you to bring him back." "Yes, sir," the security guard said, chuckling at the officer's irreverent wisecrack. But that was exactly how I felt. Resurrected. So I was dismissed and went to the security guard's billet, which was large enough for a small platoon, and I got a few hours rest. Excuse me a second. Just before midnight, I was awoken and informed that the MAC-V lieutenant colonel wanted to see me immediately. I threw some cold water on my face, and 4 Air Force security guards escorted me to his office. Upon arriving, 3 of the guards entered the room with me, and 1 stayed outside. The atmosphere was relaxed, the light colonel said. The person I was expecting had just landed and would be here any minute. And right after he said that, there was a knock at the door. We could hear a commotion outside, and suddenly the door flew open and 3 men in civilian clothes barged into the office, followed closely by the security guard. One of the younger men slammed the door behind him, while the oldest of the bunch, a pint-sized, roly-poly balding man, flashed a badge that identified him as CIA. The two younger CIA agents were carrying Swedish Ks, and the security people reacted instantly, pointing their shotguns at the chests of these intruders. The lieutenant colonel jumped to his feet, knocking his chair down. He demanded to know, "What's the meaning of this?" From the tone of his voice, I could tell he was intimidated. Every intelligence officer knew the CIA ran the Vietnam War from behind the scenes, and the lieutenant colonel was obviously surprised and uptight. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner, but the room was crackling with tension. The ranking CIA officer was livid. "Tell your men to lower their weapons," he demanded. "What?" the lieutenant colonel exclaimed incredulously. Knowing his career was hanging in the balance, his mouth was wide open. Slipping his ID back in his pocket and then motioning toward me, the roly-poly CIA officer said, "We want that man." I was half sitting, half standing in front of the lieutenant colonel's desk when one of the younger CIA agents took a step toward me. "Don't do it," the lieutenant colonel spat, his demeanor changing from passive to aggressive as he moved around his desk. "If he makes another move," he said to the guards, indicating the young CIA officer who was about to grab me, "shoot the son of a bitch." "You got it, sir," one of the security people said very coolly, before any of the CIA people could react, and that seemed to swing the advantage back to the colonel. Outrage and fear were etched on the face of the young CIA officer standing in front of me, while the other one traded menacing glances with the security people. But when it came right down to it, the shotguns won. The ranking CIA officer tried to rally his forces. "We want this guy. I'm warning you, Colonel, don't interfere." "Oh," the colonel replied in mock surprise, jerking his thumb toward me. "You want him?" The CIA officer in the middle of the room took a step back, and as he did that, the colonel walked up to the plump little CIA officer. Psychologically, it was the coup de grace. "You want him," he said in the man's face, "then take him." Not one of the CIA agents moved a muscle. Smiling slightly, the light colonel, who had recovered his sense of humor, told his ranking security guard to disarm the spooks. The security guard passed the order along to his men, who grabbed the Swedish Ks and the CIA officers' handguns. Meanwhile, more Air Force personnel had gathered in the hall outside, bolstering our forces. "That's how it is with you sissies, isn't it?" the lieutenant colonel sneered. "Not tough, not good, just arrogant." He nearly laughed in the face of the roly-poly CIA officer. "Now get the hell out of here and take your garbage with you before you wind up in the cage." In a last bitter attempt to save face, the ranking CIA officer vowed indignantly, "You'll never get away with this. You can kiss your career goodbye." "Is that so?" the lieutenant colonel replied as the security people pushed the younger CIA agents out the door. He knew everyone was watching and that something bordering on the momentous was occurring, and he had decided impetuously to wave the flag. "Well," he stated emphatically for the benefit of his audience, "in this compound, you're just 3 pieces of shit." He looked remarkably like Johnny Carson trying to keep a straight face after delivering one of his famous one-liners. Well, that did it. That was the final insult. While the Air Force security people laughed in their faces, the CIA officers left in disgrace, the roly-poly one muttering hotly under his breath, "We'll be back." But the good guys had won another round, and 2 minutes later, Mr. Jason appeared at the door. Pardon me a second. Chapter 13. The Vietnam War had taught America some hard lessons. For the true believers, it was the supreme test and loss of faith in the ideal that all Americans are united in a common cause. For them, it was a matter of my country right or wrong, and they could not accept the fact that their fellow Americans would settle for anything less than total commitment, total victory. They felt betrayed and were wounded to the core of their beings when faced with this harsh reality. Ironically, Vietnam veterans who learned to oppose the war, like myself, meaning Pete, the first person author here, also felt betrayed. But we never felt betrayed by the citizens who opposed the war back home. We felt betrayed by the people who led us into it. The difference is not the grief we feel. We all honor the soldiers who fought and died. The difference is intangible as the spirit that moves us in different directions. Consider Mr. Jason. Mr. Jason was a frail-looking older man dressed in plain green fatigues. He introduced himself but did not produce any identification. That wasn't necessary, of course, as I immediately recognized him the moment he walked through the door. The MACV Lieutenant Colonel asked if we wanted any coffee, which I accepted, and Mr. Jason declined. After he returned with my coffee, the Lieutenant Colonel lingered outside with security people for a few minutes and then retired to his quarters. It was well after midnight. Mr. Jason walked behind the Lieutenant Colonel's desk and placed his briefcase on it. He opened the briefcase and removed a miniature tape recorder and several blank tapes, one of which he inserted in the recorder. Next, he removed a legal pad and a ballpoint pen, and then he sat down. He played the machine on the edge of the desk facing me, pressed the play and record switches, and politely asked me to state my name, rank, and serial number. When I finished doing that, he rewound the tape, played it back, adjusted the volume, turned it on again, and asked, "Do you have something for me?" Handing the film to him, I said, "Yes, sir." "Thank you," he replied, describing the film canisters as he placed them in the briefcase. He was a mild-mannered man with thinning gray hair and light blue eyes. As I said before, he could have been anyone's grandfather. He looked into my eyes as if he were trying to see behind them, hesitated, and then asked me, "What happened to your commanding officer? Why isn't he here?" "As far as I know, sir, he was killed or captured." "I see," Mr. Jason replied mechanically, masking his sadness. "What happened to the other photographers and the person making the audio tapes?" "I was told that one of them was killed by gunfire, and I saw the other two go down with the chopper, sir. None of them made it out." "I see, and you were not able to recover their film or tape?" "No, sir," I said apologetically. Pulling a white handkerchief from his back pocket, Mr. Jason wiped the lenses of his glasses and held them up to the light. Showing no emotion, he said, "Tell me, please, what you saw and anything you might have heard while you were filming." I remember I told him how we arrived at the opium compound on the evening of the third day, how we deployed around the camp in 3 groups, how the Major, Jose, and I listened in on the drug deal. He perked up when I said I had witnessed the drug deal, and he asked several questions about the Air America people who dealt with the opium growers. He took copious notes while I spoke and was very interested in what the CIA agents said, but he never revealed anything about his own thoughts. Periodically, he would look up from his yellow legal pad and say, "I see," but that was his pat response to everything I said. It was close to 2 a.m. when I finished my account. "Is there anything else I should know?" Mr. Jason inquired. "Yes," I said. "During the mission, when we were watching the deal go down, the Major kept saying, 'We thought this was going on.' He said that several times, and he seemed to recognize the black guy who did the deal. He said, 'This is something we have to get back. This is so important.' He said what we were doing was of the utmost importance, because it exposed the link between our government and the opium growers, and he emphasized that these government guys were with the CIA," unquote. Mr. Jason looked at me quizzically. He turned off the tape recorder. "I'm sure he said that to me, sir. I'm sure that this was the object of the mission, to let you know that the CIA is doing drug deals with the enemy," unquote. Mr. Jason's hands were folded on the desk in front of him. He wasn't taking notes anymore, and that made me nervous. "Please go on," he said. While we were surveilling the opium compound, I kept thinking, here are government agents doing this, but the government says it's down on drugs. There's a dichotomy here because the opium becomes heroin and the heroin gets sold in America. Unquote. Mr. Jason stared at me, but before he could say, "I see," I blurted out the question I had been longing to ask him. Quote, "So maybe you can tell me, sir, why is the CIA doing this? Is it just a few rotten apples?" Unquote. I had gotten a little excited, but he didn't seem to be offended. Putting the tape recorder and legal pad in his briefcase, he said, "What I can tell you is this. The CIA is gunning for you. As you know, you're in grave danger, and we've got to get you out of the country as fast as possible." He locked his attaché case and then asked one of the security people to summon the lieutenant colonel. Then he shut the door and addressed me one last time. Quote, "The major and I and everyone who put this mission together are totally against what the CIA is doing. Now maybe you thought they were clean, and maybe it's hard for you to accept the fact that they're dirtier than most, but," and here his paternal voice, and here his paternal voice was coldly indifferent. Quote, "The agency has its own way of getting things done," unquote. With that gratuitous remark, my hat sank. Mr. Jason had been patronizing me all along. Knowing the incident would be suppressed at the highest levels of government in the name of national security, I said, mockingly, "I see." At that stage of the game, I simply could not bring myself to admit that I had been defeated. To do so would have diminished the sacrifices of my comrades. But inside, I knew that the mission had been a complete and utter waste. And that feeling has made all the difference. Epilogue. Mr. Jason left with the film, as well as his audio tapes and handwritten notes of my account of what had transpired, and that same night I was flown to Tan Son Nhut and put on the next transport plane bound for the United States. We flew to Travis Air Force Base in California, where I was given a complete physical and a set of shots. During the 2 days I was at Travis recuperating, I was quartered in a high security area under the constant protection of a Blue Beret security team. The Blue Berets are Air Force security. Though my role in the investigation had officially ended, the Air Force and Mr. Jason suspected that CIA agents disguised as military officers might try to infiltrate the base and assassinate me as a reprisal. Less than 2 weeks after I was initially approached about the mission, I returned to Cannon Air Force Base, happy to be alive. The gung-ho base security chief and Mr. Hammer debriefed me on the day I arrived, and when they were finished questioning me, I expressed my concern that the CIA would track me down at my job. Their response was to smile and say rather smugly, quote, "Don't worry, you're covered." "How's that?" I inquired. "Two things," they said. "First, the CIA wanted the film, not you. And second, you were never in Laos." "What do you mean?" "There were never any orders. The mission never happened, not officially. So you're perfectly safe as long as you don't mention it. Get the picture?" Suddenly I did understand. The joke was on me. "What you're saying is that the TDY orders were fake, that no written orders existed." "On the contrary," they said, "the record shows that you were in the Philippines. Officially, you were never in Laos." "We'll deny it ever happened." The older men gave me back my military ID, Social Security card, and driver's license. Then they handed me $2,500 in cash. They added that I had done a good job, but I would not be decorated. So I went back to work at the Public Information Office, where I resumed my normal duties and normal way of life and put the episode behind me. I watched with resignation the escalation of the fighting in Southeast Asia and the concurrent expansion of the anti-war movement at home. And as more and more reports surfaced about rising drug addiction among America's increasingly demoralized armed forces, the TDY mission seemed more pointless than ever. The CIA had proven itself invincible. So, my goodness, that camera flips off on me. There must be a loose cable. I apologize for that. Now, who was Mr. Jason? Okay. Mr. Jason, first of all, we know that the people that Pete, the protagonist in the story, is a low-level Air Force enlisted man. Secondly, all of the security that's provided all along comes from Air Force security. Now, General Joseph F. Carroll was the first head of the Air Force Office of Security Investigations, AFOSI. And as such, he developed a FBI-style investigative unit within the Air Force that was looking for, people committing crimes, graft generally. But he held that office until 1960. And then after the Bay of Pigs, Secretary McNamara and President Kennedy decided that they needed a new intelligence agency that would be specifically geared towards providing intelligence to the military, because frankly, the CIA wasn't doing it. The CIA was running its special ops and was not really providing the military with intelligence that it needed. That was the basic idea for beginning the Defense Intelligence Agency. And so they ended up drafting General Carroll from the Air Force Internal Security Office to be the first head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, one more important piece of background about General Carroll is that he did not come up in the military at all. He had, in fact, been an FBI agent since 1940 and had become one of J. Edgar Hoover's most trusted aides. So when Senator Stuart Simonton was looking for someone to start the Air Force Office of Security Investigations, he asked J. Edgar Hoover to send him the best man for it, and that was General Carroll. So General Carroll had never been a major or a captain or a lieutenant, never went to Air Force, never learned how to fly a plane. But there he is, a lieutenant general in the U.S. Air Force, in order to provide the military with specific intelligence about battlefield conditions, and specifically in Vietnam, where the CIA simply was not doing it. Okay. Now, let's just take a moment and step back to my Mindfields number 272 and 273 about Spelly's War, or Cardinal Spellman's War, which was really the Pope's War, extended into America through the American Pope, Francis Spellman. Well, we know from this really wonderful memoir called American Requiem by James Carroll that the Carroll family was deeply, deeply Roman Catholic. His mother was the kind of woman that would just go into ecstasy in the presence of a cardinal. The church had complete and 100% credibility with the Carroll family as these events were developing. But of course, the son of General Carroll, James Carroll, is anti-war. He becomes a protester, and protested actually outside of the Pentagon in October of 1967, when the Great March on the Pentagon happened. And we're going to describe some of that just to bring this back into perspective. Doubtless aware of my father's background as a Pentagon maverick, McNamara appointed him as the first director of DIA. According to a 1995 article in the American Intelligence Journal, McNamara believed that Carroll's integrity and civilian background, which had kept him out of the internecine battles of the Pentagon, would enable him to influence the production of reliable and objective national intelligence estimates. Once again, my father's role was to challenge the assumptions and power of the brass, only this time his opponents in turf battles would be Navy admirals and generals of the Army and the Marines, as well as the Air Force. From now on, and for the first time, there would be Pentagon intelligence estimates from an agency that owed its first loyalty neither to a service branch nor even to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but directly to the Secretary of Defense and the President. As for the CIA, it had to reckon with its neophyte counterpart when in September 1962, the DIA, and not the CIA itself, provided the first hard proof that the Soviets were putting missiles in Cuba. So now I want to remind you that as we've studied the Torbit document, the nomenclature of an assassination cabal, that General Joseph F. Carroll is mentioned as one of the principals in the cabal, that the Defense Intelligence Agency chief is one of the actors in connection with FBI Division 5 that Torbit credits for organizing the assassination of President Kennedy. Now, we have not yet confirmed that the Torbit document is reliable, but let's look at it this way. General Carroll, a devout Catholic who knows Cardinal Spellman, who knows Pope John the 23rd personally, okay, he's going to be devoted to Spelly's war, at least until the assassination of President Kennedy. So when the cabal gets put together by the Defense Intelligence Security Command, if you accept the Torbit document, and the connection there is Louis Bloomfield is in charge of the Division 5 of the FBI. So Louis Bloomfield, the Canadian/American/British intelligence agent, who is in fact one of the most important Zionists in the military and the CIA, Louis Bloomfield connects easily to Angleton, and so that's the connection to the current revelations about Angleton that we can tie in. So let's just assume that as head of the DIA, General Carroll either didn't object or had some active role in the cabal. It's hard to think of an Air Force officer or any officer participating in that, but clearly some did. So is that something that he comes to regret and causes the last years of his life to be, basically depressed to the point where he becomes senile at an early age? That's the future for him that is recounted here in the book American Requiem. It's a very sad tale. It's sad, just like my dad's tale is sad. There's so many parallels with General Carroll, who is 10 years older than my dad, and then with James Carroll and myself, who was 10 years older than me. So Kennedy's killed November 22nd, 1963. And then on December 13th, 1963, McNamara receives a memorandum from the Defense Intelligence Agency stating that while the Viet Cong had not scored spectacular gains over the past year, they had sustained and even improved their combat capabilities. The report added that unless the South Vietnamese Army improved its operations, Viet Cong activities would probably increase. This new gloomy assessment, as Mark McNamara calls it, was later confirmed by the CIA's John McCone, who told the president it's abundantly clear that the statistics we received over the past year on which we gauged the trend of the war were grossly in error. Grossly in error for the next 10 years, that would be one consistent characteristic of Vietnam assessments and reports reaching the top echelons of Washington. Wars generate their own momentum and follow the laws of unanticipated consequences, McNamara writes. The miserable, cursed, futile, impossible effort to find out what was happening in the jungles, along the supply routes, on the bomb-cratered plateaus, in the alleys of teeming cities, along the electrified DMZ, and in the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people eventually drove American decision-makers, including my father, past distraction and into a kind of madness. My father's fellow Air Force generals should have been able to count on him to support their cause by reporting that the bombing of the North was working. But according to the Pentagon Papers, the DIA consistently offered up analysis, data, not argument, that the bombing was having no significant effect on Hanoi's capacity to wage war. By August 1967, now I'm going to interject here, the TDY mission happens in June of 1967. So this timing is very important. By August 1967, before executive sessions of the Senate Armed Services Committee, McNamara was in a feud with the Joint Chiefs over the winnability of the war. At that point, there were more than 525,000 GIs in Vietnam. General Westmoreland was asking for another 200,000, and the chiefs wanted another 400 bombers for a massive expansion of the air war, which until then had focused on supply lines. They wanted harbors mined and dikes destroyed and the flow of traffic on the Red River stopped. They wanted $10 billion more per year, above the $30 billion already being spent. They wanted, as Curtis LeMay had put it 2 years before, to stop swatting at flies and go after the manure pile, quote unquote. McNamara, in his testimony before the subcommittee chaired by Senator Stennis, opposed all this. He rebutted the generals and admirals by citing the monthly DIA report, an appraisal of the bombing of North Vietnam, which invariably concluded, here was the second shoe falling, that the air campaign was not working. McNamara had come to the conclusion, and in this as well as other secret councils was arguing for it, that the war could not be won and should not be expanded. A suspension of the bombing and earnest negotiations were what was needed. Mr. Secretary, I'm terribly disappointed with your statement, Senator Strom Thurmond replied. I think it is a statement of placating the communists. It is a statement of appeasing the communists. It is a statement of no win. McNamara's memoir generated other feelings in me. We thought the main argument going on in America in those years was between hawks and doves, but among the hawks themselves, the argument was far more deadly. However much liberals and aging peaceniks continued to hate him, it was the right wing that truly threatened McNamara in the 1960s, not the left. Now, in October of 1967, we have the March on the Pentagon. And, well, there's stories about my father that I know that center around that. I'll tell them another time because I've only got 5 minutes left to make my point here. So let's see if I can wrap it up. So eventually, Lyndon Johnson loses his will for the war as well. McNamara, Congressman Tip O'Neill, broke with the war in September of 1967. In February 1968, Walter Cronkite rejected the war, predicting it would end in stalemate. LBJ said, "If I've lost Walter, I've lost the support of the average American citizen." In March of 1968, the citizens voted for Eugene McCarthy in the New Hampshire primary. By the numbers, like the communists of Tet, he lost, but by polling 42% to LBJ's 48%, McCarthy transformed loss into a victory. Thus, on March 30th, Johnson announced his rejection of the escalation plans. He suspended the air war over the North. He asked for an immediate start to negotiations, and he renounced his plans for re-election. With regard to the March on the Pentagon, quote, "I watched the whole thing from the roof of the building," McNamara writes. Years later, a reporter asked him if I had been scared. "Of course I was scared," he said, unquote. Now, I'm going to get a picture of Joseph F. Carroll up here. One moment. Oops. Now, let's go back to the picture that was drawn by Pete in the book TDY, in which he described an elderly man with graying hair, slight build, and blue eyes as having been Mr. Jason. From what we've seen in these two books and the rest of our studies of McDuff, I can tell you it's my firm opinion that Mr. Jason in that book was Lieutenant General Joseph F. Carroll, and that General Carroll is the person who organized the mission, and that, as he and Mr. Hammer in the book say, there are a number of us who absolutely oppose what the CIA is doing. They are purchasing opium, it becomes heroin, and it gets sold to Americans. The mission was to take down the CIA. At the end of the mission, Pete becomes frustrated because they didn't take down the CIA. They didn't stop the criminal activity. Mr. Jason, i.e. General Carroll, in my very strong opinion, had been outflanked by the CIA. And so ultimately, since they knew about the mission, and of course, we know now that the CIA had ultimate communications ability to listen to any conversation in the world at that time, and still does, of course, but that ability to listen in to what General Carroll was doing and what the major was doing in the story, what the mission was, and all of the information that General Carroll would have wanted to keep secret was in fact known to the CIA. And so the CIA was in fact able to get the tape, get the video, get the film. So General Carroll's effort was frustrated. Pete's effort was frustrated. McDuff's effort was frustrated, but they made the effort. They tried. They did what we all have to do, and that is they tried. And I am inspired by putting these facts together as I have this morning, and it's a product of a week or more of study that I've just been completing. I am so proud to say that Pete and Judge General Carroll and the men who lost their lives in the mission, everyone involved in it was expressing the deepest patriotic duty. Patriotic in the sense of the Constitution of the United States was being violated. The infestation of our country with drugs was going on. And these people that were doing this were traitors. So I say, well done, General Carroll. Well done, McDuff. Well done, Pete. Thank you. And let's make sure that this story doesn't die with these heroes. Thank you all for being with me this morning. I'll see you tomorrow, Tuesday at 11 a.m. right here on McDuff Lives Rumble channel. Bye now.